Go ahead, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Della Luna, and I'm presenting today from unceded Ohlone lands, also known as Wechun. Today I'm presenting titled Changing the Narrative. It's a look at the Mercury-Uranus opposition from a decolonized perspective. And I wanted to say thank you to Linda and all the others who helped make this space possible, this platform. It's a wonderful opportunity. I wanted to start with our recent transits. Here we have the Libra new moon from October 16th. But here you're seeing Mercury at 17 degrees Scorpio, opposite Uranus. I have it marked there with the red circles at 9 degrees Taurus. And this is an intense energies, moving in a new direction, possibilities, potentially. So Mercury retrograde here in Scorpio, a water sign, is about processing some deep emotions. And has a potential, like all Mercury retrogrades, to be both challenging and meaningful. Uranus represents new perspectives that can lead to change, new vantage points, and seeing new dimensional possibilities that we were once unaware of before. We're also seeing Mars retrograde opposite the sun in the full phase, which is intensifying tensions and conflicts that might be happening in both the inner and the outer realms. So the inner being our inner thoughts, tensions there, and the outer with others, which I can relate to all of those in my personal life. So we're seeing lots of oppositions. And we're also seeing the powerhouse combination in Capricorn, Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, as well as their planetary nodes. Surfacing, representing the issues regarding the collective, all of humanity, issues that are surfacing that need to be healed, reconfigured, composted. It's a time to confront some past conceptions and ideals that were rotten from the start. So Mercury is retrograding in Scorpio now, and on the 27th, that will retrograde back into Libra, where it's then ruled by Venus. And now we'll find an environment and more situated towards balancing, rebalancing, and integrating our inner structures into something that is more beneficial for us. And also the opposition of Venus opposite Neptune, it's also showing, repeating the message that there's something within our belief systems that we need to look deeper at. So I myself have Uranus in the 4th house in Scorpio. This is where Mercury is transiting. And I really took this time to explore what that might mean, having Uranus in the 4th on the IC, being this place of the charts where there's roots or the foundation of the chart. And Uranus is often associated with lightning. And I wanted to meditate on, like, what is it like to have lightning at the roots? And so I set out on an internet search. This is very Uranian post. Everything about this is pretty Uranian. And I looked for moments where there might be lightning in the earth. And this is one of the images I came up with. This is from a volcano, obviously, and it's a very plutonic image and fitting for the times now. But here you're seeing a moment where lightning naturally occurs within the earth. And you're seeing very transformative power of nature here with the molten red, intense heat rock. And that the red is not the colored rock, that's the heat. So I did want to say, I did find some instances where lightning struck like a tree or a gas tank, and then the lightning went into the ground, and then it went through the ground to another building, and it caused an explosion. So lightning does go through the earth, but I decided that given the times of 2020 that we really didn't need to look at those images today. So Uranus also correlates with radio waves and television. And so I wanted to think of it like an antenna and what it would be like tuning into our roots, maybe like a radio antenna, like tuning into a frequency. That's what Mercury can help us do, to get messages from either the past, from the underworld, the things that are often associated with darkness and with Scorpio. So this is kind of another example. On the left, you're looking at lightning in slow motion. And on the right, you're looking at mycelium growing in fast motion, actually. So mycelium is very Uranian, and it's a network of root-like structures that carry nutrients like superhighways in the fungi community. I say community, it's kingdom. It's estimated that in the area under your single foot, that there's over 300 miles of continuous mycelium network in that small area. The mycelium are connected to all plants as well. They function bringing resources, the building blocks of life, to all plant life. So it's conceivable that the network of mycelium exists, a single network of a mycelium exists all around the planet. And it's also conceivable that this single organism is the largest sentient being on the planet. Yet it's something that we cannot see or conceptualize from our human perspective. I'm gonna now talk about this book, which also kind of spurred my journey here for this presentation. It's called African American and Latinx History of the United States by Paul Ortiz. And it's actually written in 2018 and received several awards, but it tells a bottom-up history from the bottom up. Tells the story of vantage points of Latinx and African American communities, largely from the labor movements and different, let's just call them social justice movements, not only labor, but around the world. So everything, according to Ortiz, everything that happens in the United States happens in a global context. Yet this perspective is not the way a history textbook would relay this information. So Ortiz argues that the Reconstruction and abolition movements of the United States past were actually global movements. I'm going to share a couple of things I learned from this book. So both the United States and Mexico struggled for liberation from their respective empires at around the same time. However, Mexico as a republic dealt with the situation of slavery immediately upon gaining its independence from Spain by making it illegal to torture, rape, and capture another person. And by making these acts illegal, no one could enslave another, so slavery effectively was squashed in Mexico. I should add that also discrimination against indigenous was illegal in Mexico by law from the beginning. The United States has a much different story. By the time of the creation of the Republic, 1776 or 1775, the anti-slavery campaign was already 100 years old. Yet the founders such as Hamilton, Jefferson, and Adams saw too much potential profit in slavery, and so it remained legal in the laws after the American Revolution. The founders also saw profit loss as enslaved people escaped into Mexico, because if they could get across the border, they would be free, and they couldn't be recaptured in Mexico. So it was in 1846 that the United States invaded Mexico to try to force Mexico to reimpose slavery. This US invasion of Mexico is now called the Mexican-American War, which is a very misleading name. Luckily, the founders were not successful at reimposing slavery in Mexico. But what this does mean is that there are instances in our past or history that we might mistakenly to be coming from a fair or balanced place, and they are not. For example, the Emancipation Proclamation signed by Lincoln in 1863, which I presented on last time, while it actually did give enslaved people the right to earn income and to own belongings, it never intended for them for the enslaved to reach an equal class status. The founders always intended that those that were enslaved, even once liberated, would remain a permanent working underclass. This is the largely unknown foundation of the political climate we find ourselves in today. And this is something that I learned new just since the last time I presented. And I saw that presenting in this way, adding this to my presentation, was a way of honoring my ancestors. So the author in this book creates an inclusive history, one of multicultural and emancipatory internationalism, with evidence of centuries of solidarity in the movement, and that our ancestors played a key role in the liberation of all people on this hemisphere. So here's some Astro Data. I'm going to talk about both of these. So Mercury stationed retrograde on the 13th of October at 11 degrees Scorpio, and it stations direct on November 3rd at 25 Libra. So Mercury governs communication, messages, trickery, information, speaking, naming, categorizing, language, writing, scribes, logic. It rules Gemini and Virgo. It is ever changing, and it's governed by short journeys, represents or correlates to short journeys. So according to Jeffrey Wolf Green, the Mercury function within consciousness is to provide an individual with an arrangement of the phenomenal world, which allows individuals to operate in the midst of his or her reality in an ordered and linear way. So I'll switch to Uranus here. Uranus stationed retrograde at the 15th of August at 10 degrees Taurus, and it will station direct at 14 January at 6 degrees Taurus. So Uranus has an 84-year orbit. So the last time Uranus was in Taurus was 1934 to 1941 during the Great Depression. In EA, Uranus represents liberation from conditioning patterns, whether it's parental or societal. It represents past life memories and the subconscious, as well as the individuated unconscious. Uranus rules electricity, electronics, computers, technology, internet, networks, and it's about breaking free from barriers. Okay, so yeah, so this, I'm trying to integrate the two of these, Uranus and Mercury opposition. The message we get from this is about breaking free from barriers and beliefs that we've held that are restricting us. And we are being asked to consider something from a new perspective. So Uranus also is associated with abnormalities, abruptness, liberation, or civic organizations, disruptions, dissents, rebellions, dialects, lightning, impulsiveness, independence, legacy, the nervous system, nerves, trauma, liberty, and other things that are hard to put to words. According to Jeffrey Wolf Green, Uranus correlates to all the memories of this and other lives. This is why it is called the higher octave of Mercury. It correlates to all the memories and knowledge we have ever come before, even that which you cannot necessarily recall consciously. Archetypes for breathing and the breath is also Uranus, which has been a theme here for 2020. So Uranus in Taurus is intuitive, abstract, and nonlinear. This means that events can have a Uranian impact. Like an event from the present, how would I want to say this? An event from the past can have an impact on the present and the future later, like not linear. I will give an example of that later, but Another Uranian example of that would be people who are struck by lightning twice, which is actually a phenomenon. It seems the lightning can remember who's been struck by lightning, and there's more than one instance of people being struck twice by lightning, not on the same day or the same place. So Taurus is fixed earth. It represents the body, survival, fertility, preservation, resources, values, security, possessions, landowner, farmer. And some of the shadows representations could be shut down, like a stubbornness, and hoarding, which I thought were 2020 themes. So I wanted to take a look at the Uranus discovery chart and then recenter the narrative. Continuing in this vein. I guess we'll start with Mercury. So Mercury governs communication, messages, and stories. And I'm going to tell you the story of Anansi the Spider. And it's actually the story of all stories. So it's an ancient collection of fables from Western Africa. And it's an oral tradition. So it encompassed several, what would you call them? What are they called? Not decades, but hundreds of years. So it spans probably thousands of years and across many regions. And there's stories within stories. So there's like small fables that fit into a larger story. So Anansi is a spider and is often depicted in popular tales interacting with the supreme being and other deities, who frequently bestow upon him temporary supernatural powers. Anansi is the child of Mother Earth and associated with skill and wisdom in speech. And he's often anthropomorphized, blended, mix between animal and human. Can be a human with spider-like features such as 8 legs, or a spider with a human face. Anansi, in some instances, takes the form of a human as well. He's known for his ability to outsmart and triumph over more powerful opponents through his use of cunning, creativity, and wit. And despite taking on the role of trickster, Anansi's actions and fables often carry him as a protagonist due to his ability to transform his apparent weaknesses into virtues. Through the centuries, Anansi's stories persisted. Oh, here we go. So Anansi went to the sky god Nyame, and he wanted to do a trade with the sky god Nyame, and because Nyame was the controller of all story. And Nyame looked at the small spider and kind of felt for him, but he knew. He gave him like an impossible task because he just wanted to play along. And he gave Anansi the task of collecting 5 of the most dangerous items in the world. And he would have to bring them back to the sky god, Nyame. And that if Anansi could do this, he would be granted all stories. And so Nyame created the task thinking there was no way that the spider could do it. But Anansi was undaunted by the challenge, and he set out on 5 missions. And you can see some of the elements of the Anansi story. He has to capture some hornets, not just any hornets, but like the most dangerous hornets, which he captures in a gourd, and he brings those back. And he uses his words to capture them. He convinces them to get into the gourd, and then he takes them to the king. The sky god. Also a leopard of Sabo the leopard and Onini the python are these creatures that Anansi brings back one by one in his adventures to the king. And one thing I liked about these stories is Anansi always stops home first and asks his wife for advice before setting out on the adventure. So Anansi brings back each item and is granted the honor of being the symbolic representative of all story. Story with a capital S is a gift granted by the sky god. And in Western, Greek mythology, Uranus is the sky god as well. So here we go. We're looking at the Uranus discovery chart. And the Uranus was discovered on March 13th, 1781 at 24 degrees Gemini. It was discovered opposite Mars, conjunct Saturn in Sagittarius. Pluto was at 6 degrees Aquarius, square the nodes, on the Scorpio-Taurus axis. And both Pluto and Uranus were out of bounds. So I wanted to take a look at this moment. This is around the time when electricity was discovered, so you can understand why Uranus is associated with this. But I wanted to look at the most common keyword associated with Uranus is unexpected and liberation. And while many other things happened in the world in this era, this was a time when many enslaved African and indigenous peoples were fighting the oppression of colonial empires. At the same time, the colonies were fighting for liberation from the empires as well. So pretty much the whole world was in a struggle for liberation. This is an era when people found themselves in proximity to others who did not speak the same language or have the same culture. And they found themselves forced into a new reality together. So they had to develop ways of communicating, ways of making a plan, all in secret. So while from the perspective of the colonial settlers, the slave uprisings were a surprise, I actually believe the story is much different. I believe this was a calculated, strategic, ongoing, potent, organized, sophisticated human interaction that is beyond our understanding. So here we have the Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791. It actually lasted a total over 13 years, and they had to have 3 colonial empires defeated over the course of 13 years to actually get to be liberated. Here we're seeing Uranus at 15 degrees Leo, the sun opposite Pluto at 20 degrees Aquarius, Saturn conjunct the south node in Aries, and here Pluto is out of bounds as well. So Haiti became the first republic. I'm going to flip to the next slide. Like I said, it took 13 years. So this is the beginning of the Haitian Revolution, and here's the end. Haiti became the first republic, January 1st, 1804. And it became a beacon of liberty for all liberation movements in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, all subsequent freedom movements in Latin America keyed in on this Haitian Revolution. And the first flags of several countries, for example, Venezuela, the flag was first flown in Haiti. The empires of the West responded to the rebellion and Haiti being free by placing an economic stranglehold on Haiti to punish and restrict its access and contact with other markets, to set an example. The economic sanctions and restrictions on Haiti continue to this day. And this history has largely been eliminated from textbooks. So here, looking at the chart, we have Pluto at 6 degrees Pisces, opposite the moon for Virgo, Mars conjunct Chiron in Capricorn, Saturn balsamic to Uranus in Libra, the North Node at 16 Aquarius, trine Uranus at 16 Libra, and here both Mars and Mercury in Capricorn are out of bounds. Okay. So this is super Uranian. This instance here, like I said, how things can happen now that impact the past, and the past can impact the now. So here you're seeing two court cases. One in the inner chart is the Civil Rights Act, which was enacted July 2nd in 1964. And on the outer wheel, you're seeing a more recent decision by the Supreme Court from June 15th, 2020, that secured rights for LGBTQ in regards to employment and labor. So the court decided that the language, it's interesting, the language of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits sex discrimination, applies to discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So you're seeing here, you'll see the nodal return. These two cases, you see how there are two north nodes at the top of the chart. The two north nodes line up, as well as the Mercury return just to the left of that. I didn't put a circle around that one. And what I found was super interesting. You're seeing a Mars-Venus conjunction, where the 2020 Venus conjuncts the 1964 Mars. And all of this around sexual orientation and gender identity. Is very interesting that that happened. I'd also point out that the civil rights, the inner case, the inner circle there, you'll notice that Pluto is conjunct Uranus. And just did some research from Jessica Lanyadoo. And according to the research, this is when we see new laws form, when Uranus and Pluto come into contact. So I shared this to say that basically the struggle that was going on in the civil rights movement has an impact on what's happening today. And so people today are benefiting from what happened in the civil rights movement, much the same way people in the future can benefit from the movements happening now, even if they don't feel connected to them in this moment. I think. So now I wanted to take a look at some things that I think we need to re-examine with our, Mercury and Scorpio, and kind of uncover some deeper truths. I have 3 examples here that I'm going to share, all relating to the land and to Earth, Uranus and Taurus. The first I'm going to start with is permaculture, which is a very popular new age. I have a description here. So permaculture was started in 1978. It's a set of agriculture and design principles centered on whole systems thinking, simulating or directly utilizing the patterns and resilient features observed in natural ecosystems. It uses these principles in a growing number of fields, from regenerative agriculture, rewilding, and community resilience. And I have some examples there, things you might commonly hear from a permaculturalist about a food forest, fire management, rainwater collection, and farming with nature. This modern civilized science and research, in this instance, has led us right back to the practices of the original inhabitants of this land. Science has validated this, but indigenous and native peoples have been doing these practices for millennia, yet there are people who believe that food forests were created in 1978. Also, let's see just a statistic, 98% of all rural land in the United States is owned by the descendants of colonial white settlers. How can we have a conversation about regenerative agriculture without talking about moving private property to communal land management, reparations for Black, Brown, and Indigenous, whose bodies have literally funded the creation of the entire country and economy? So this brings up a question. Is permaculture like a modern new age advancement? Or is it just repackaged indigenous practices being marketed and sold back to us? The second example I'm going to give on the decriminalized nature or the Ethnogenic Plants movement. So in the last 2 years, there's been social movements to decriminalize these medicines, and certain municipalities have done so. These include medicines such as psilocybin, MDMA. I actually am not really sure if there's a general list or if each municipality decided which ones to include or not. But that's what you're seeing. These logos on the top are 3 different locations that have decriminalized mushrooms and the use of mushrooms. It says medical science, Western medical science has now found that these plant medicines are useful in healing PTSD and can actually be integrated into Western therapy practices with ease. It's been particularly important to the veteran community, especially having a legal status of the medicine change, because veterans were unable to access the medicine because it was illegal, especially veterans, right? So now today we're seeing research coming out of Johns Hopkins University, the leading scientific research in their facilities that are opening up to begin doing treatment, research, experiments on PTSD and ethnogenic plants. And there's a quote from one of the scientists. It says, psychedelic medicines can open a doorway to seeing one's psyche and connection with the world in new and helpful ways. They acknowledge that it's been appreciated by shamanic traditions for thousands of years, but now science is exploring new ways to investigate this. If you go back like 2 years initially in this movement, there was a critique about including indigenous and native voices into the discourse. They hadn't been consulted and included. And so I do believe 2020 was the first year where indigenous tribes from varying regions of the world were invited to actually speak at these conferences. And the logos you're seeing at the bottom are actual like international conferences that go on in the ethnogenic plant world. And so 2020 was the first year where indigenous leaders were brought, and I should say ceremonial leaders, not just any leaders, but the actual people who would deal with the plant medicine. And much to their surprise, they actually did not want their plant medicines to be decriminalized by Western law. And they actually were concerned that opening up the market would actually cause damage to the medicines, like the amount of medicines. And there was like a not misunderstanding, but like Western science thought that these plant medicines were just growing out in the wild, just, you know, naturally, but it was actually the indigenous culture, like their way of life, that kept the plants growing generation after generation. So by removing the people from the land, we actually removed the growth of these plant medicines. So we actually have very, very little left compared to what we could have if indigenous still had access to land. So, and actually peyote was removed from the list and it was not decriminalized at the request of indigenous leaders. Another thing the indigenous pointed out was that the leader who would provide ceremony, it would be passed down through a lineage from grandfather to son, daughter, to the grandson and granddaughter. It wasn't something, leading ceremony of this nature wasn't something anyone could just pick up and become a ceremonial leader as one can today. You had to be born into the lineage. And the lessons came through your lineage of how to lead the ceremonies. And the way Western science has perceived connection to these plants is disrespectful. So what might seem like Saturn, you know, age of Aquarius, seems like we need to take a closer look at what we're doing on our path to healing. But here we're seeing, once again, Western settler science and research has led right back to the very practices of the original habitants of the lands. By that, I'm talking about healing the PTSD. The question, here we are again, repackaged indigenous practices being marketed back to us. The question that I have is, what can the psychedelic movement provide for those that have ancestral knowledge more than just inclusion in diversity panels at conferences? And can the pharmaceutical medical industry listen to the voices of the indigenous and ignore the seduction of the potential profit in this industry? This is about the Schumann frequency on the left here. And I feel like the two of these, like the left, to me, I see Uranus in Taurus on the left. And I definitely see Mercury on the right. And I guess just the blue color makes me think Mercury in Scorpio. But so the Schumann frequency is 7.83 hertz, and it's the frequency that is found in the earth by someone named Schumann. That's who got the name for it. So it turns out this Schumann frequency is actually created by lightning. Hello, Uranus. So at any given moment on the earth, there's about 2,000 thunderstorms that are rolling around the surface of the earth, producing 50 flashes of lightning every second. And so each lightning burst creates electromagnetic waves that circle around the earth, between the space between the earth and the ionosphere, and they combine to create a repeating atmospheric heartbeat that is now today known as the Schumann resonance. They've since then, I don't have the year that this was discovered, but they've done experiments and isolated people from the Schumann frequency and put them like in a bunker, an iron bunker where they couldn't connect to the frequency, and it caused all sorts of disturbances in people's emotional and physical body almost immediately. Within a few days, it was almost unbearable. And the good news is, though, when they let the people out of the bunkers, they returned to normal very quickly once they reconnected with the frequency of the earth. Now for the benefit, I should say, I don't want to skip a part here, but modern technology and pollution has led to a state where the ionosphere is full of just pollution, and so it's affecting the frequency. And so this is kind of precious to us now, this frequency. And so now for the benefit of our health, we're encouraged to harmonize with this frequency as much as possible. Encouraged to get out in nature, such as forests or the beach, simple acts of nature, whether it's taking a walk in bare feet, taking a nap in the grass, or breathing in fresh air. And I just want to take a moment to recognize that these are the very practices that are the way of life of the indigenous peoples who once lived on these same lands. So once again, we get the journey, the 500-year journey of modern Western science and research in this country has led right back to the very practices of the original inhabitants of this land. Let me see if my thing's gonna work. Okay. So here we are, October 2020, in between two full moons in the liminal space, the time of October Samhain, when the veil is thin. I found this image to be very representative of the times we are going through. You see the I guess I've gone multiple ways with this, but I see Saturn as the balloon. I see that structure releasing, and I see Aquarius or Uranus as the water or consciousness. There's an instant there where you see it holding its shape, where it still has the exact same shape as the balloon before it starts to shift into the unknown. Then I kind of see that colander strainer potentially as a new Saturn or a new Uranus, but you see the possibility there. Like it's the unknown it almost feels stressful just watching it, but then when you see what happens from it and you see the potentiality there expressed, I don't know, it just feels like it correlates to this moment. So the planetary nodes of Pluto and Jupiter are all involved in our transits today, and it's showing that we're really here to do the business of healing our collective past. And the veil being thin, this is a period which lasts from mid-September until the start of November, which correlates to our transits here, the Mercury retrograde and its shadow, and the Mercury-Uranus opposition. And it's said to be an easier time to make contact with the spirits of our ancestors. And with Mercury here, I believe we can listen to messages. And of course, the veil is the thinnest. In particular, the date is Halloween, which is coming up October 31st, a full moon in Taurus at 8 degrees Taurus, which will be conjunct Uranus. So this is a time of psychic clarity and divination. The veil acts as a consciousness filter. It is based on the belief that all life is part of a shared field of psychic energy, a collective consciousness, a time to see what is normally hidden. Meditation, astral travel, and psychic reading are performed during this period, as well as self-exploration and examination, since it's believed that this period is conductive to introspection and seeking the darker self or the inner self that is unknown. In African lore, the Oya travels between worlds and especially the world of the dead. She's said to be the intermediary between the spirits and the living during this time. Oya, as a Yoruban goddess, controls the rain, the winds, and storms. She's mothering, powerful, and has a strong desire to help people through their struggles to transform. So here we are, we have an opportunity to listen to the messages from our ancestors. Some of us will hear messages of support and strength, and others might be getting messages from their direct ancestral lineage to stop and look within, to stop harming others, to stop overlooking and treading upon others for the benefit of the self or individual or personal family. In closing, this is a Uranian image, I believe, seeing like if you took the space-time continuum and like stretched it out like a slinky, you could see how if that was condensed, you could see how they would impact each other. But when you stretch it out, it helps you see how things from the past might be impacting the present. And I wanted to say that the Black Lives Matter movement and other social movements against police brutality is redrawing a spotlight to American history, and it's opened up new dialogues towards truth. And we're creating a new possibility to remember an inclusive history of multicultural and emancipatory internationalism, with centuries of evidenced solidarity in the movement that our ancestors played in the role of liberation of all people on this planet. And I just wanted to say that we are in one struggle. Here we are. It's just one struggle. And please get involved. And at this point, I guess I will pause and see if there's any questions.
Hi, Della. I wouldn't say I have a question. I thought there's a couple of things that kind of struck me about what you were talking about, and all that kind of have to do with like you were talking about the sacred medicines and how the indigenous really didn't want for it to be made really public. And and then a couple of times you talked about repackaged indigenous practices, returning. And do you think that has any correlation with, all of the work that is going on now with reparations and, and realizing, the damage that we've done all along?
Yes, I would say so. like reparations is I definitely see that with Uranus and Taurus. And I feel like I live in California. And so here our governor just signed a new law. I should have the date. I was going to include it in this presentation, but I didn't. I chose not to. But within the last month, a new bill has been signed by our governor here to move along a reparations payments to African Americans here in California. So while I could say, like, in some regards that issue is coming to the surface, I think largely it's not. Additionally, I think politicians love to use things like that in election years to kind of get support. And so I haven't actually seen any movements, like real movements towards making reparations payments. But I do feel it's very important, because one thing a lot of people don't realize is for like Black people, like our bodies, physical bodies, were the actual commodity and currency and in the economic system. And so while I might not be enslaved today, I never got to cash out from the system. And that's what reparations does. Actually gets us out of being the commodity that is traded for wealth here in this country. And just to say, when something else I didn't talk about in this, but when slavery ended, certain institutions and people, let's say families, they actually got to cash out from the property that they lost, that the enslaved were their property in the law at that time. So that's how you see many universities and huge institutions that are like universities, like Cambridge is an example, but that institution was funded with an endowment when they cashed out the physical bodies of their enslaved property. And that's just one example. So yeah, so the people in the higher upper class, they got to cash out, but the people who are actually the commodities still to this day have never been cashed out from the system.
Yeah, I guess kind of what I was getting at is that that maybe it has to be for the right reasons, rather than just to say that we've done this.
It's true. And I feel like, I mean, when we look at the mycelium and the connection of all life on the planet, the way life functions, when we talk about an EA, about how every movement is either one to, like, oh gosh, to merge or to separate from,
right?
I feel like reparations would definitely be a returning or reconnecting. Alternately, I think it's interesting how mushrooms grow from the earth. And if they're connected to this mycelium, that notion of putting it inside your body then reconnects you to all life. So maybe through the use of these plant medicines, we can actually start to bring back that feeling, so that people then understand, like what you're asking, like how do we get there for the right reasons? And it might reawaken within us that frequency to want to change.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I've always thought that we try to appropriate the indigenous culture of the plant medicines, and it's not. We're doing. I think a lot of times we're doing it for the wrong reasons. We're doing it for whatever reasons, and they had their own ancestral reasons for doing it, and here we are trying to appropriate it.
Yeah. And what I've seen in the conferences, that the indigenous are willing to lead, and they're willing to take on the leadership role.
Yeah,
and move us forward.
Mm-hmm. This is awesome. Very, very interesting talk. I totally enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I don't know if there's any other questions, but that's my website down there. I go by Decolonize Astrology on Instagram and Facebook. And I just like looking at astrology through different cultural archetypes and different historical lenses. And that's it for me.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to